Hey everybody, this is Mr. Mob coming at you with another APUSH video. We're continuing our tour through topic 7.11, focusing in on foreign policy between the world wars. Last time we talked about the emerging use of the appeasement policy as a way to try to offset a massive world war by giving into small demands of aggressive nations. Now, note, okay, we are seeing, when we see appeasement and some of these other actions, you are seeing these Axis power nations, be it the Germans, the Italians, or the Japanese, they're testing the boundaries on what they can get away with. They're testing, at what point will Allied nations respond militarily? At what point will the U.S. respond militarily? And one of these examples will be in 1937 when the USS Panay was sunk by Japanese aircraft. Now, the Panay was off the coast of China, aiding those Chinese that are trying to escape from Japanese occupation. The Japanese thought that the American ship was a Chinese ship and sunk it, killing 3 Americans. Now, this might be seen as an act of war against the United States, but Japan quickly accepts responsibility for it. They apologize formally, and they pay the United States an indemnity for the cost of the ship and loss of life. So on the surface, it looks like, oh, Japan made a mistake, but you could also see that as another test of what they can kind of get away with. And you could maybe take a look at this, and think, oh, maybe Japan thinks the United States is a little bit soft. And if the Japanese thought the U.S. was soft, Hitler had almost no respect for the Western European allies. When we last talked about Hitler, Hitler was focused in once again on the idea of Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer, one empire, one people, one leader. And for Hitler, he is asserting himself that he must be the leader of all ethnic Germans wherever they were living. And what we have to keep in mind is that Germany was not the only home of where ethnic Germans lived. To the south of Germany, which was actually Hitler's homeland, Austria, that's all ethnic Germans. You also had ethnic Germans living in the western part of Czechoslovakia, known as the Sudetenland. And so Hitler's make these claims that he must unite all ethnic Germans. He kind of plays the nationalism card. The idea being is that, well, all the Polish get to live together, and all the Latvians get to live together, etc. Well, then all the Germans should be living together. And so in 1935, Hitler is going to make demands to try to take Austria, and he will be able to get away with it. In what's going to be known as the Anschluss, we're going to be seeing German tanks roll into Austria and occupy Austria without having to fire a shot. Once again, Hitler threatens war if he does not get his way, and the Allied powers back down in the name of appeasement. Once again, well, he's just uniting all the ethnic Germans. Germany should be allowed to be nationalized like any other place. Once again, sends an important message. You may recall we talked previously in our last video about how a young child that goes to a grocery store and throws a tantrum, and gets a cookie, learns from that experience. That same kid that did not deserve the cookie but still got one because of, pitching a fit, that kid has now learned that the next time they go to the grocery store, if they engage in the same activity, they will get that cookie. And appeasement has the same effect for Hitler in the late 1930s. He throws a tantrum, he gets to militarize the Rhineland. He throws a tantrum, he gets to have Austria. And in 1938, he is now focusing in on the Sudetenland. And, Western allies are starting to pick up on the idea of, well, is Hitler just going to keep demanding? And this is going to lead to a pretty tense situation where we are going to see Allied leaders meet with Hitler at the city of Munich to try to, assess the situation and figure out what to do. Hitler promises that this will be his last territorial desire, his last demand territorially. He will then basically have all ethnic Germans under his control, and that'll be it. So the question then becomes, are you willing to blow everything up in the name of the Sudetenland? You know, a small strip of territory in northwestern Czechoslovakia. Are you willing to throw the world into world war for that? And the Allies aren't willing to do that. In fact, you know, when they allow Hitler to take the Sudetenland, we will see English Prime Minister at the time, Neville Chamberlain, upon his return from the Munich Agreement, hold in his hand, you know, the document showing that Hitler had signed the Munich Pact, claiming that they had achieved peace in their time. And that's a very important comment. You know, Chamberlain's trying to say, we have learned from the past. You know, we did not let, you know, nationalism create war. We have allowed for peace to reign. We have avoided bloodshed. We've learned from the past. But unfortunately, that's not the lesson that's learned. As we will see, the lesson that's learned is that Hitler can keep pushing to get what he wants until somebody actually stands up to him. And that's unfortunately going to come at a tremendous, tremendous cost. Now, back home, we're going to see Roosevelt becoming more and more concerned about expansion and aggression made by these Axis powers countries. And we will see in response, Roosevelt deliver what's going to be known as the quarantine speech, which is, you know, a desire to try to get allied democratic nations around the globe to support one another to protect against threats from democracy. You know, so the idea being is that, you know, if you are Britain and France and the United States and Canada and Australia and all of these other countries that are republics, you know, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, whatever, that all of these free countries around the globe have to look out for one another and not tolerate aggression and not tolerate aggressive expansion. And that's going to be important. That's where the term quarantine comes from, the idea that you cannot let these countries just keep growing and expanding and expanding. You've got to keep them within their limits. But note, this is happening at a time where most countries are willing to seemingly do just about anything to avoid war. That's how traumatized they are from the First World War. And once again, this is in conflict with what most Americans want, who want to stay out of the problems of the world. But of course, you know, war is going to prove to be unavoidable. And that brings us to 1939. Now, we know that Hitler is not going to be content with just taking, you know, Austria and the Sudetenland. Hitler's next area of focus is Poland. Now, Hitler says that there are ethnic Germans in Poland that need to be brought in to the empire as well, and yada, yada, yada. But now the Allies have finally drawn a line in the sand saying, no. You promised you wouldn't want any more territory. Now you're making more demands. If you invade Poland, that will be viewed as an act of war by the Allies. Now, Allies, what I mean by that is the French and the British. Now, Hitler is a student of history, and he knows that if he just goes right into Poland, that he's going to be facing the traditional challenge that Germany's had to face in European wars, and that's a two-front war. The Soviet Union to the east and the French and the British to the west. Fighting a two-front war proved to be costly for Germany trying to win the First World War. So Hitler doesn't want that. And so how does Hitler try to avoid a two-front war? Well, that's where the Soviet Union comes in. Hitler and Stalin will meet in 1939, and from that we will see what's going to be known as the Non-Aggression Pact. And what this is a promise by both sides, both of these homicidal maniac psychopaths, that they will promise not to attack one another. There will be peace between these two powers. Now that's nice, okay? And it is important for Hitler to sense that now he's got a good, you know, neighbor to the east that he doesn't have to worry about. But what about invading Poland? Well, here's the secret part of the Non-Aggression Pact, the one that wasn't getting, media attention at the time. And this was basically this. Poland is now going to get invaded. Hitler's made that decision. He's rolling in. And all he needed from the Soviet Union is not to fight him in return. So how do you do that? Well, when Hitler decides to invade Poland, the way it will play out according to this plan is that when Poland's invaded from the west, now the Soviet Union can now have an excuse in the name of defending their territory to move their troops into eastern Poland. So let me kind of show you here on the map. You know, the idea being is that when German troops move into the west, the Soviets will have an excuse to defend to the east, and therefore the Germans get Western Poland, the Soviets get Eastern Poland, and there's no more Poland. And so both countries get territory and an agreement not to fight one another. And for Hitler, this is especially important because he knows that invading Poland is going to mean war with France and Britain. He knows that. But he's confident in the size of his military and his resources that if he only has to fight a war on one front to the west, he can win. And this is going to be viewed as a way to pacify the Soviet Union in the process. So Hitler thinks that he's got this figured out. And with his eastern flank now pacified, now he will roll the tanks in on September 1st, 1939. And in doing so, this will be seen as the official start of World War II. The Germans are going to be implementing what's going to be known as a Blitzkrieg Attack, the idea of fast, overwhelming use of tanks and fighter planes to kind of pounce on your enemy before they have any real chance to defend themselves. And so you go in, knock them out quickly, and then you can move on to another target. Poland is not going to take too long before it falls. Now, there will be a lull following the fall of Poland before we get into the next phase of the war. We kind of call that the phony war, where there's not much military action. And basically what it is, now that Poland's fallen to the east, now Hitler's going to be moving all of his forces now to the west and unleashing hell on what are going to be the Allied powers. As you take a look at this map right here, you're going to see, now don't worry to the east right now. We'll talk about this part later. But as you look to other parts of Europe, you will see over the next year that Nazi forces will run over Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and will actually conquer their arch rival, France. They will take Paris by the summer of 1940 and will do something in a year, less than a year, than what the Germans tried to do in 5 years of World War I. They have now knocked out France and are now beginning to bomb the heck out of Britain. Hitler's plan for a 1,000-year Reich, that he called the Third Reich, is now seemingly coming to fruition. It seems that nobody can stand up to him. And at the same time that, Hitler's forces are winning in Europe, we see Nazi and Italian forces now taking over North Africa as well. So you see early on, the U.S. is on the sidelines, France is knocked out, the Soviets are on the sidelines, and the British are on the ropes. Now, with this happening, how does the U.S. respond? Remember, Roosevelt had always been an interventionist. He'd always want to get involved, but the American people weren't with him. Now that war has officially broken out, now more Americans are starting to realize what is really a grave threat in Europe, that the Nazis are a serious threat. Now, that being said, the American people are slowly moving in Roosevelt's direction, but not nearly fast enough. It's a slow process. So Roosevelt can't go from purely neutral to end the war. He's going to have to take gradual steps. And one of those gradual steps is going to be what's known as the Neutrality Act of 1939, a.k.a. the Cash and Carry Plan. What this is going to do is provide assistance to our friends in the Allies, although we're not officially in the Allies yet. They're going to allow them to buy American weapons on the condition that they pay cash for them and transport them back themselves. The rationale behind this is that, yes, we want to help our friends, we want to stop fascism, but we don't want to do anything that's going to, put us in a position where we might get sucked into the war. So if you pay cash, then there's no cycle of debt in the future that you have to worry about. If you pick up the weapons and transport them yourself, then you don't have to worry about like a Lusitania situation where an American, ship gets sunk and now you kind of have to join the war. So we're taking some steps. So not totally neutral anymore, but certainly not official in the war. But if you had doubts in terms of kind of where we're moving on this, slowly but surely, one thing to keep in mind is that we see by 1940 that the U.S. is now going to be bringing back the draft. The first time ever we'd had a peacetime draft. So we are mobilizing. We are preparing for war. We're doing stuff to help our friends in war, though we are not officially declaring war yet. But we are knocking on the door. We're getting real close. Okay? We'll leave it there for now. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.